In the year 10,191, the human race is capable of advanced space travel and visits all kinds of places in the universe. Each planet is a different nation with houses ruled by dukes, but they're all part of the same empire. One of these planets is Arrakis, which has a surface made of a very harsh desert and contains the only source of spice, a rare and valuable substance that extends human vitality and is needed for interstellar travel. Because of this, Arrakis is considered the most valuable planet regardless of the desert, and all the noble houses wish to rule it. Spice harvesters that the locals call outsiders come to Arrakis to ravage the land during the night to avoid the heat of the day. These outsiders have treated the local people cruelly as they've colonized the planet for its supply of spice. The Harkonnen family came to the planet many years ago and currently controls the spice production, which has made them richer than the Emperor. The locals, known as the Freemen, always try to attack the spice harvesters in an effort to drive them away, but these warriors are never strong enough to win. However, one day the Emperor sends a decree that kicks the Harkonnens and their people out of the planet, but nobody knows why. Meanwhile in Caladan, Lady Jessica and her son Paul of House Atreides are having breakfast. Jessica wants her son to practice a power known as Bene Gesserit and tells him to use the voice, which should allow him to mind control people. Paul tries to use it on her and fails, but Jessica reminds him it takes years to learn. She also asks if he's had any dreams, and Paul thinks about the visions of a girl called Chani, but he lies and says no. After his meal, Paul learns more about Arrakis, which is plagued by powerful sandstorms and giant sandworms. Long exposure to spice has given the Freemen their characteristic blue eyes, and they consider spice to be sacred. However, the Emperor uses spice to help navigators travel the stars. Sometime later, Paul and his father Duke Leto welcome the Herald of the Change, who has come with orders from the Emperor. House Atreides will take control of Arrakis and serve as its steward. Duke Leto accepts and seals the deal with his ring. Afterward, Paul meets with Duncan, the swordmaster of House Atreides. Paul asks Duncan to take him to Arrakis with him and his team, but Duncan declines, saying he'd be court-martialed. Paul tells Duncan about the premonitory dreams he's had of Arrakis, explaining he's seen Duncan with the Freemen and dying in battle. However, Duncan still says no because he doesn't believe in the dreams. Refusing to give up, Paul goes to see Leto to ask for permission to go with Duncan, but Leto also refuses because Paul must be at his side when the family arrives in Arrakis. He fears a war is coming, that's why he sent Duncan ahead with a team to try to forge an alliance with the Freemen. Later, Paul trains at sword fighting with Gurney, the War Master of House Atreides, who is angry because Paul doesn't take training seriously and forces him into combat. While using a force field shield to prevent the blades from penetrating, they fight for a few minutes and end in a tie, which would have been a mutual death without the shields. Gurney warns him how vicious the Harkonnens are, so Paul should be ready for war. Meanwhile in Gadi Prime, the homeworld of House Harkonnen, Robin visits his uncle Baron Harkonnen to tell him that all of their ships have left Arrakis. Furious, he yells as he wonders why the Emperor did this to them, but the Baron and his right hand Peter mysteriously say that a gift isn't always a gift. Back in Caladan, Jessica wakes Paul in the middle of the night because Reverend Mother Gaius of the Bene Gesserit school is here and wants to meet Paul. Apparently Jessica told her about his dreams. First, Dr. Yue checks Paul's vitals and he uses the chance to whisper to Paul that while the Bene Gesserit claim to serve the greater good, they also serve their own agenda. Then Yue that Paul's heart is strong, and Jessica uses sign language to ask him to keep the secret. On their way to see the Reverend Mother, Jessica uses sign language again to tell Paul to remember his training. When they enter the room, Reverend Mother Gaius orders Jessica to wait outside, and Jessica tells Paul to do everything that Gaius says before leaving. Paul is angry that Gaius gave an order to his mother, but she uses the voice to draw him closer and force him to his knees. Then Gaius instructs Paul to place his hand in a box as she holds a poison needle to his neck. If he takes his hand out of the box before she tells him to, she will kill him with the needle. Paul begins feeling unbearable pain, but as Jessica recites the litany against fear, he starts seeing his visions of the desert and keeps his head up. Paul passes the test and is allowed to take out his hand, which is uninjured. Gaius tells him that if he had been unable to resist his impulses, like an animal, she would have had to kill him because he has inherited too much power from his mother. Then she asks him about his dreams, so Paul tells her about the girl in the desert. Afterward Gaius leaves, but on her way out, Gaius reminds Jessica that to train a man for the Bene Gesserit was against the rules, that's why Paul had to be tested. It turns out Jessica had been instructed to bear only daughters, but her pride made her believe that she could give birth to the chosen Messiah. After Gaius leaves, Jessica turns to discover that Paul overheard their conversation. He accuses the Bene Gesserit of steering the Imperium's politics from the shadows, but his mother tells him there's more to it than that. The Bene Gesserit has worked for generations to bring forth the One, a mind powerful enough to bridge space and time, the past and the future. They believe Paul might be that person, but Paul is sad that he's just part of a plan. Soon the family packs everything up and arrives in Arrakis. They are greeted by cheers from the Freemen and Paul wonders what they're saying, so Jessica explains they're calling him Messiah in their language. After a long flight over the desert, they make it to the city of Arrakeen, which is protected by a wall from the weather and the sandworms. In his room, Paul learns more about the planet. To avoid attracting sandworms, the Freemen cross the desert using the Sand Walk, A special walk that mimics the natural sounds of the desert. Suddenly Paul notices a tiny floating machine used by assassins entering through a small hole in the wall. The device flies toward Paul only to stop as they stare at each other. When a servant enters the room, Paul snaps out of it and grabs the device in his hand, crushing it. Afterward the guards are alerted and they find the assassin dead inside a wall. He'd been cemented into a crevice 6 weeks before and had been waiting for the right time to strike. Meanwhile, a Bene Gesserit sister meets with Baron Harkonnen and Peter to bring a message from the Emperor, who has promised to strengthen Harkonnen's forces with his own elite military force, the Sardaukar, but nobody can know about it. The sister also tells them that they may kill Leto, but that Jessica and Paul must be kept alive. Harkonnen gives his word that he will not harm them, but after she leaves, the Baron tells Peter to kill the whole family anyway. Sometime later, Leto and his council decide they will have to inspect the spice silos because it seems they were sabotaged by the Harkonnens, so they'll have to wait for the Judge of Change to oversee the process. At that moment Duncan arrives and tells them about his mission. He lived with the Freemen for 4 weeks and learned that there are millions of them on Arrakis, some located in tunnels below ground that Harkonnen didn't know of. Duncan has also brought Stilgar, the leader of a Freeman tribe, to meet the Duke. After Leto greets him, Stilgar spits on the ground, but this is a sign of respect in his culture and Leto returns the gesture. Stilgar tells them that they are outworlders who take spice and give nothing in return, so Leto responds that he knows the Freemen have suffered and promises his people will leave them alone. Stilgar accepts this as honorable and turns to leave, but Paul asks him to stay. Sadly Stilgar can't stay, but he tells Paul in his language that he recognizes him. Afterward Duncan shows them some of the technology he's borrowed from the Freemen, including a paracompass, which can tell direction despite magnetic interference. Sometime later, Leto and his people meet the Judge of Changer Kynes, and her attitude almost gets her killed by the guards. She proceeds to inspect the still suits they're wearing to make sure they're in good condition, otherwise they won't survive in the desert. Suddenly Kynes notices the way Paul is wearing his boots in a non-standard fashion and asks who taught him to do it, but he says it just felt like the right way. Then Kynes takes them to see the harvesting fields aboard 3 aircraft. A harvesting crawler is harvesting spice from the surface while a spotter is on the lookout for sand waves that indicate worm activity. The worms travel deep but they're attracted by noise and vibration. They can't use shields because those attract worms too. At that moment Leto spots a sand wave and Kynes calls for a carryall to retrieve the crawler. The carryall arrives and lands on the crawler, but a malfunction causes the carryall to fail at picking up the crawler. This means the crawler's crew is in danger, so Leto decides that they will use the 3 aircraft to save them. As soon as the aircraft land near the crawler, Leto orders his men to throw out the shield generators to make room, then he calls out over the radio for the men to leave the crawler and come aboard. The carryall flies away as the worm comes closer, and the crew is guided by Paul toward the aircraft. However, he suddenly freezes when he falls into a trance. Leto is about to take off when they realize Paul isn't on board, and the worm is almost there. Now Paul falls to his knees and hears weird words in his mind before he starts whispering to himself. Luckily he's pulled from his daze by Gurney, and together they begin running only to be knocked down as the worm starts to break the surface, causing the sand to sink in. The duo quickly regains their feet and makes it to the aircraft, which flies away as they watch how the sandworm swallows the crawler whole. Back at the base, Leto tells Kynes that she must realize that the Harkonnens left them faulty equipment to ensure that they fail, but she says the carryall was merely old. Afterward Paul is examined by Yue, who says that Paul seems to be sensitive to spice but he'll be fine. After Yue leaves, Paul tells Jessica that he didn't have an allergic reaction, he actually had a vision. He describes what he saw about the desert, the war, and even kissing Chani, saying that it was confusing because he saw what he thought was his death but wasn't. He also says that he knows that Jessica is pregnant, which shocks her because she just learned about it. Meanwhile on the planet Seleucus Secundus, the Sardaukar army is getting ready to depart under Peter's observant eye. In the evening, Yue visits Paul and leaves him something to drink, which secretly has a sedative. Moments later, some guards hear a noise and a mysterious person suddenly shoots them all before entering a room and lowering the base's shields. Leto wakes up and realizes something is wrong, so he leaves his room to investigate. When he finds a body, he tries calling security but gets no response. After activating his shield, he turns the body around and finds a servant with a dagger in her chest. At that moment a poison dart comes out of the darkness, penetrating Leto's shield and knocking him unconscious. The mysterious figure person comes out then and reveals it's Yue. Soon Gurney is also awakened and learns that the shields are down. He rushes outside to find a large enemy ship hovering in the sky, and he orders his forces to get their own ships off the ground. Explosions begin going off all over the place as the enemy forces bomb the base while anti-aircraft weapons return fire. Enemy transport ships land and disembark soldiers, so Gurney and his men rush to fight them hand to hand. At the main steps, a group of Atreides men is keeping the invaders at bay, but suddenly they're surrounded and annihilated by Sardaukar. Back to Leto, he wakes up but can't move. Yue explains that he's made a deal with the Baron to turn Leto over because the Harkonnens have his wife hostage. After getting Leto's ring for Paul, Yue implants a false tooth in Leto's mouth. If Leto bites down on it, it'll fill the air with poison gas that will kill him, so Leto must choose the right time to kill Baron Harkonnen too. While Robin gathers all the Atreides prisoners to kill them, Duncan sneaks around and kills a bunch of enemies before checking the noble family's rooms, only to find them empty. He immediately runs outside and kills any enemy on his way until he manages to escape in an aircraft. Meanwhile, it's revealed Paul and Jessica have been kidnapped and are being taken away in an aircraft. The Harkonnen men discuss getting naughty with Jessica, and when Paul warns them not to touch his mother, they just smack him. Ignoring his mother's signed warnings, Paul tries using the voice on the men, but it doesn't work. The soldiers decide they're far enough into the desert so they'll throw Paul out, and a desperate Jessica signs to Paul to use the right pitch. Concentrating, Paul uses the voice again, and this time it works. The soldier removes Jessica's gag, allowing her to use the voice to make him kill all the other soldiers and release her. Then she kills him too and frees her son. Soon the aircraft lands in the desert, but the enemy manages to cripple it remotely, so Paul and Jessica can only watch how the city burns in the distance. Then they find a survival kit with a note from Yue saying this kit has an Atreides beacon. Paul also finds his father's ring in a tent. Sometime later, Leto wakes up in the presence of Baron Harkonnen. Yue also arrives and asks for his wife to be freed, but the Baron floats over and kills Yue instead. Then Harkonnen tells Leto that his family is dead and that his house has fallen, causing Leto to start whispering. The Baron activates his shield and leans in to hear him better, and Leto bites down on the false tooth to release the poison gas. Several guards die while a few run out and shut the door. Afterward, men in protective suits enter the room and discover the Baron is alive on the ceiling. Back to Duncan, he lands his aircraft and finds Kynes and yells at her for not warning them, but Kynes says she's a judge and must stay neutral. However, Duncan points out that House Atreides was sent to Arrakis to die, so there's no neutrality here. Out in the desert, Paul and Jessica hide in the tent while the Atreides beacon sounds regularly. Paul accidentally absorbs some spice and has another vision of Chani, who shows him a great battle in which Paul is fighting in a full suit and has blue eyes. Suddenly he becomes agitated as he tells Jessica that he sees a holy war spreading across the universe, fought under the Atreides banner. When Jessica tries to calm him down, he reacts angrily, telling her that the Bene Gesserit made him a freak. She tries again and manages to hug him as he says he knows his father is dead. Suddenly the beacon alerts them of something upcoming, so the duo leaves the tent, which has been covered in sand. At first they think a mouse caused the alarm, but at that moment an aircraft lands with Duncan and Kynes, and Duncan kneels for Paul as he calls him Duke. Eventually they arrive at an old ecological testing station where they can hide from the incoming storm. Paul tells Kynes that the great houses fear precisely what just happened to the Atreides, and only together they stand a chance against the Empire. When he mentions that the Freemen believe in the Messiah, Kynes says this is just superstition, but Paul begins mentioning things about her he shouldn't know and says that he's seen her dream. He also says that as Emperor he could make Arrakis into a paradise. At that moment the enemy finds the station and a battle starts between them and the Freeman guards. Duncan hears the noise and opens the door to find the battle in the hall, so he salutes Paul before going out to join the battle, locking the door behind him. Duncan fights with amazing skill and brings down a few men, but sadly he's outnumbered and eventually falls. Meanwhile Kynes makes Paul and Jessica follow her through a back door. The enemy soldiers fire through the locked door, so the trio has to dodge the attack as they run. Suddenly Duncan reveals he's alive and attacks the soldiers, giving his friends a chance to escape before he dies for good. Once outside, Kynes tells Paul and Jessica to escape in the aircraft, giving Paul advice on how to fly through the storm and find the Freeman. Sadly there's no room for her to come too. As the duo flies away, Kynes plants a thumper that sends vibrations to attract a sandworm that she intends to ride. Unfortunately she's found and killed by Sardaukar soldiers, but before she dies, she bangs on the ground. The sandworm soon arrives and swallows them. Meanwhile the enemy chases after Paul and Jessica and shoots missiles at them, but Paul flies into the sandstorm and the missiles can't track them anymore. However, the storm starts damaging the aircraft, so Jessica recites the litany against fear and Paul has a vision telling him to let go. Paul releases the controls and lets the storm guide the aircraft, but when they make it out, the wings fall off and they make a crash landing. Thankfully they survive, and after putting on the still suits, they begin wandering to find the Freeman. When they stop to rest, Paul has another vision of Chani, who tells him to face his fears. He also sees another Freeman in the vision who tells him that he has much to learn. Using Duncan's paracompass, Paul and Jessica keep on going, and Paul teaches Jessica the sand walk to avoid attracting worms. Moments later, they accidentally step on drum sand which makes a noise and gets the attention of a worm. The duo runs away as the creature chases after them, but suddenly, someone activates a thumper that attracts the sandworm's attention away from them. They climb on some nearby rocks for safety and discover they're surrounded by Freemen, who set up the thumper. Stilgar is among them and tells his people not to touch Paul, however Jamis says the boy looks like a weakling and can't be the Messiah if he needs rescuing. Stilgar explains that Paul is young and could learn their ways, but Jessica is too old and can't come with them. The Freemen immediately attack, but Jessica is a great warrior and captures Stilgar, putting a knife to his throat. The Freemen back off and Jessica lets go of Stilgar, who accepts they both can come. Suddenly Paul hears a voice and discovers that Cheney is there, telling him she doesn't believe he's the Messiah. They should get moving, but Jamis objects to taking the strangers with them and challenges Jessica to a fight. Stilgar says Jamis can't challenge a priestess, so Jamis asks who will fight in her name and Paul volunteers. As they prepare for combat, Paul has another vision of him losing, while a voice says that Paul must die for the Messiah to rise. Cheney comes over and tells Paul that she wants him to die with honor, so she lends him a blade made out of worm teeth. Then Paul and Jamis begin to fight. Paul quickly gains advantage and puts his blade to Jamis's throat, asking him to yield because he's never killed anyone before. Stilgar says there's no yielding and that one of them must die. Jamis fights ferociously, but again and again Paul overpowers him without killing him. When a vision suddenly takes over Paul's mind, Jamis knocks him down. However, Paul is finally accepting his destiny and gets up to deal a killing blow. Afterward, Stilgar says that Paul is one of them now, while Jessica insists that Paul needs to get off the planet. However, Paul disagrees, saying that his father came to Arrakis not for spice or riches, but for the strength of the Freemen. He says that his own road leads into the desert and that if the Freemen will have them, they will come. As the group heads into the desert, Paul and Jessica watch a Freeman ride a sandworm using hooks. Then Cheney tells Paul that this is only the beginning. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.